Alrighty, guys, and welcome back to the Basketball Fix podcast. Now, on today's episode, we're going to be doing our third installment of Higgins' Hot 3 Takes of the Week. Now, if you are watching us on YouTube, you will see down the bottom of the screen the couple of topics that we will be touching on in today's episode. And I'm looking forward to obviously diving into those a little bit deeper in today's episode. Now, as always, make sure you've followed, liked, and subscribed to the podcast wherever you get your podcast from, or over at the YouTube channel as well, because we're really enjoying what we're doing here. And we know a lot of you guys are really starting to come on board now at the Basketball Fix, and we're looking forward to delivering you guys more content, articles, and keeping you up to date with the biggest news and topics in the NBL world. Now, as always, make sure you go and check out our website as well, www.thebasketballfix.com. Check us out on Instagram and X at the Basketball Fix Podcast. And make sure, like I mentioned before, you're downloading, subscribing, and liking all the episodes wherever you get your podcast from. But on today's episode, it's going to be a very interesting one because obviously round one has now come and gone. And what a ground that was. It was incredible to watch some NBL basketball. You know, the preseason was fun, but we all know what the preseason is there for. It's really about giving those guys who have trained really hard in the offseason a bit of a chance to showcase their talent, to maybe sort of force themselves into a starting lineup or even just into a rotation as well. The stars don't play 35, 40 minutes even sometimes in those preseason games. They're more looking at 21 to 25 minutes for most of those star players when you look back at the preseason minutes. But now, obviously, this is what we've been waiting for. Round number one, Hoopsfest. We're going to be touching on that a little bit later. That was an incredible success for the NBL. I think they'll be very, very happy with how it all played out. And there's some major, major topics which we're going to touch on today. But before we jump into the topics that we're going to be talking about, I've got two honorable mentions that I wanted to quickly touch on before we did get into Higgins' Hot 3 Takes. Now, the first one that I wanted to touch on had to be the Perth Wildcats. I think they just honestly look the goods in NBL 25. We look at some of their statistics, 106 points, 48 rebounds, 24 assists. Now, the one that stands out the most to me isn't the points and isn't the assists. It's the rebounding stats. They actually led the NBL this round for rebounds, and that is a trend that needs to continue for the Perth Wildcats if they are to have any success in NBL 25. Because as a Perth Wildcats fan and a guy who's followed the NBL very, very closely over the last couple of seasons, that has been their most disappointing stat over the last 3 NBL seasons, I would say. So they haven't really gone out there and attacked the rebounding market. This year, they have in the offseason. Obviously brought back Christian Doolittle, who is, I think, our best rebounder for the Perth Wildcats. You've got Dylan Windler, who's a new import. He had 10 rebounds in his first game for the Perth Wildcats. And then obviously Keanu Pinder as well, who does his thing, had 6 rebounds for the Perth Wildcats as well. But they just look the goods. And I think the most important part, if you are looking as a sort of whole NBL product, the Perth Wildcats have probably got the most stable roster coming into NBL 25 with the guys that they've brought back. Now, they've only really lost Corey Webster and obviously Jordan Usher from last season, I think, in terms of big roster and rotational players. But they've brought back in some really good young talent as well, which is super, super exciting. Elijah Pepper, he didn't have a massive amount of minutes in that particular game, but what he did in those short amount of minutes, I think really showed JR that, hey, this guy needs to play basketball and he needs to be on the court at any moment as well, because he was really good in transition, had a couple of steals, hit a couple of threes, not afraid to shoot the basketball either. He's super, super exciting, got the crowd going, and I think he's going to see some minutes very, very shortly in the NBL. And then obviously Benny Henschel. I think he's been waiting for this sort of moment, I guess, in terms of, real rounded basketball and the NBL basketball world. And I think he applied all the tools of the trade last night, obviously for the Perth Wildcats against Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. And he was dominant. I think he had 10 points, 2 rebounds, 7 assists, just did everything right for the Perth Wildcats. So I think he's definitely a chance to obviously continue on that trend and make a massive impact for the Perth Wildcats, because if you get a really good impact out of him, Itan Almanza, Elijah Pepper, even younger guys like, Michael Harris as well, who's going to have a big season. They're the new guys coming through that need to take over from guys like Jesse Wagstaff to be able to at least, more make him just a leadership role player. Maybe comes out for 2 or 3 minutes per game instead of playing 10 to 15 minutes. So the rotation looks really strong. And I think the Perth Wildcats right now are currently the best team in it. In terms of obviously the top end talent and even the lower end talent, you could say, is still very, very strong. Now, the other one that I wanted to touch on is we spoke about this in our award prediction show. It was a little bit of a laugh. So, the Next Generation Award is basically the NBL's version of the Rookie of the Year. Now, it can be awarded to a player who's under 25 years of age. So up until 25, you have a chance of winning this award. So I guess it helps out the people who are rookies in the NBL who have just come over from college. Some of those guys are 22, 23 years of age. some of them even 24 as well. So it gives those guys a bit of a chance in their first professional season to be able to win a next generation award or a rookie of the year award as well. So let's look back to the last two winners. Now, I made a bit of a joke in these award prediction shows that it's the Sam of the year, because the first winner of this award was Sam Wardenberg, and then last season was Sam Froling. Are we going to see the third Sam of the year really, really have a massive crack for this sort of, I guess, award and this position as well? And the Sam I'm talking about is Sam Menenga. Now, he was incredible. I think Adam Ford is kicking himself right now. I think in terms of guys that he didn't want to lose last year, I said this in the NBL sort of preseason thoughts, NBL 25 for the Cairns Taipans. You can go check that episode out as well. That this is a guy that I think they're really going to miss come NBL 25, because he does everything so well. So one, he's a big body and not afraid to throw his size around. He can shoot the three ball at a very efficient rate, and he's a really strong rebounder as well. So he goes up against Tyrell Harrison and Rocco Zakarski. Tyrell Harrison has probably been the best NBL player in the NBL preseason, in the Blitz competition as well, all that sort of stuff. He goes and manhandles Tyrell Harrison. Tyrell Harrison was averaging a double-double in the NBL Blitz. He comes into this game, a lot of expectations around him. He only has 9 points and 5 rebounds, and Sam Menenga on the other end has 22 points and 7 rebounds to go with 1 steal as well. That is absolutely incredible. I think he's definitely on his way to 100% winning this award and having a massive chance in doing so. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how he does finish his NBL season, because I know Freddie Gillespie's a chance, obviously, to come back into this team very, very shortly. And I think, realistically, you've got to roll with Sam Menenga at your starting 4 or 5 personally. So it's going to be interesting to see what the New Zealand Breakers do in their rotations. But I had to give a little bit of a shout out to Sam Menenga, because that was an incredible start to the season. He's had a lot of pressure on his shoulders as well to obviously leave the Cairns Taipans to head back to the homeland in New Zealand. And he absolutely dominated in front of a really, really good and strong Brisbane Bullets sort of front court as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he does. Now, let's get into today's 3 topics. And the third one is obviously the one that we'll start on right now. And I think it's a bit of an interesting one, because we've seen over the last couple of seasons that the NBL world is just exploding in terms of some of the talented players that we are getting over here at the moment. Now, I think this is one that is, how do you say it? I think it's going to be an interesting one to talk about, because we see all the time in the NBL world that there are import players that come over to the NBL and either do really, really well or struggle a lot in the NBL. But what's really exciting is when those guys who do really well the previous season come back, put it all together even more, and just shine on the biggest stage that we do have over here in Australia, the second best league in the world. So let's have a look at some of these performances, because the third topic and the first one that we'll touch on in a sense is that the stars always shine the brightest. Now, some of these statistics have been absolutely incredible. The NBL world is filled with incredible players and incredible imports. Now, the first one I've got written down, he is arguably, I guess, one of the more exciting players in the NBL, a former NBL MVP. Jalen Adams had an incredible performance against the Adelaide 36ers in round number 1. Put up 25 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, 2 steals, and 1 block as well in what was a dominating sort of game as well. And the key statistic that I even look at when we go a little bit further into the box score, 0 turnovers. 0 turnovers is incredible for a 40-minute era game. So he had a massive game, and he was followed by his teammate as well, Xavier Cooks, who had 13 points and 13 rebounds as well. I think it might have been dominating performance there by him. Now, obviously, another MVP. We're talking of last year's MVP, balled out again for the Perth Wildcats. Bryce Cotton, 26 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and 1 steal in a very solid win against the Phoenix, which we touched on a little bit earlier as well. But he was just, again, in MVP form again. I think he's poised to have a massive chance this season of obviously going back-to-back in terms of MVP trophies. But where the league is at right now, he's every chance to obviously miss out on even being nominated in the top 3 as well, because, we'll touch on more of these performances as we go down here, but the league is in, I think, its best spot it's ever been in terms of obviously star quality players and even just the star local players coming through as well. Now, another import who is, I believe, in his 3rd week in Australia playing for this particular team, still learning the ropes, still learning the players' sort of play styles and how they want to play basketball, even how Justin Tatum wants to play basketball. And that's Darius Days. Now, I said on Higgins Hot Takes last week before round 1 that this guy, I think, will be better than Gary Clark over his whole entire season last year. And I'm looking forward to obviously seeing where he goes. He started on a very, very good note. 20 points and 12 rebounds against a very undermanned and I guess undersized, in a sense, Cairns Taipans, but he was dominating. You look at the 12 rebounds in terms of realistically playing up against Tanner Groves, who is arguably going to be, I think, one of the better big men in the NBL this season. Obviously, they've got Pedro Bradshaw as well, Sam Wardenberg, Kyron Galloway. They have got an extensive list, the Cairns Taipans, of really solid, I guess, big men in a sense. But Darius Days was super exciting. Watching him in the preseason, the reason I said he was going to be better than Gary Clark was when I watched the game against the Melbourne United team, and he had 22 points, I think 10 rebounds in that game to go with 2 blocks, and just dominated from the start of it, hitting massive three-point shots, driving to the basket, a couple of posterizers as well. He is going to be highlight material all season. So amazing sort of first round for him as well. And I think, obviously, we can't go too far into this segment without mentioning this guy as well, Parker Jackson Cartwright. 20 points and 11 assists in what really turned out to be a tight contest between the New Zealand Breakers and the Brisbane Bullets as well. He is a guy who's going to be an MVP candidate for sure. Now, this is what makes me excited because obviously he was here last season, so he knows how the league works. He knows how to play in this league. He obviously knows how to lead a team. Obviously, he led the New Zealand Breakers to a 6th-place finish last season and then led them into, obviously, the semi-final sort of chances as well. But he was super impressive. I think he's only going to get better this year. I think one thing that makes me a little bit more exciting as well is the fact that they've built that team around him now. So obviously last season, it was sort of built around William McDowell-White. But this season, they know Parker's the number one guy, and they've built their whole franchise around him. So I think it's only going to make him better. And we could be seeing some of those double-doubles very, very often in the NBL for Parker Jackson Cartwright and the New Zealand Breakers. But personally, for me, the best player of round number 1 had to be the masked one, the masked warrior, whatever you want to call him. We'll figure out a nickname for him, but Keanu Pinder. He was absolutely incredible. 29 points, 6 rebounds, 3 steals, was aggressive in everything he did, shaping up to Nathan Sobey, helping his teammates out. I just think he was incredible. The 3-point shooting was unreal. Like, as a Perth fan, but also just an NBL fan, seeing a guy like him, I guess, really work on a part of his game in the offseason and it come to fruition very early on in the next season, it just makes you excited to watch NBL basketball and even Perth Wildcats basketball this season as well, because I think he just didn't know how to play last season with another superstar player, because that's what Keanu Pinder is. He came over from the Cairns Taipans as an MVP candidate in that NBL season, came over to the Perth Wildcats last year. I think he just didn't know how to play with Bryce Cotton, because obviously when he was in Cairns, the ball was in his hands more than it was in any other person's hands at the Cairns Taipans in NBL 23. So he came over here. He's got to learn how to play with Bryce. I think he's definitely worked on their game. That 1-2 punch is working very, very nicely. And he's in for a massive season in NBL 25. So he is one that I just had to mention because it's been super, super exciting. But we've just spoke about 6 players right there, and that just shows you how good this league is. And there's other guys that we missed out on even touching on. Derek Walton Jr. had a great game. Cam Oliver had another great game as well, 19-7, coming off the bench as well in that particular matchup. There is a lot of talent in the NBL, and then you've obviously got some of the local guys coming in as well. But what are we really starting to see right now? We're starting to see that this league is filled with star players. Some of these guys I could bet my bottom dollar on would play in the NBA if they could. It's weird how they're not. There's obviously other parts of their game missing potentially while they're not in the NBA, but it just shows you that this is a really, really competitive league, and there's a reason why this is the number 2 league in the world currently right now, and I'm super excited to see where this league obviously continues to go. Now, let's get into point number 2 on Higgins' hot takes, and this one has to be the fact that Montrezl Harrell is a star. Now, I had my questions last week, and I think the questions more weren't based around the fact of him being a great NBL player or a great basketball player. It was more based around the fact, is he going to be a good teammate? Because we have seen him in the past, and I think he'll be the first to admit, at stages, he challenges his teammates. Sometimes, yes, to make them better, but if you challenge them in the wrong way, you come across as a bit arrogant, a bit cocky, and also a bit of a bad teammate as well. So that's going to be one thing that I think he's got to definitely work on if he wants to make it back to the NBA. And obviously watching that first game against the Sydney Kings, he really did show that he is more than capable of being a very, very strong and a very, very consistently good leader for this team. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here, because he's obviously signed as an injury replacement for Jarrell Martin. But I think in all seriousness, they've got to really figure out how they can sign him to this team and Jarrell Martin into this team as well, because they've still got one import spot spare. but obviously it does come down to some of the money. So I hate to say this, so they move on a guy like Isaac Humphries potentially and buy out his contract. I don't know. He just looked a little bit lost in yesterday's game. I know it's game one, but Montrezl Harrell, 13 points, 13 rebounds, and 2 blocks in 20 minutes. And he didn't come up against no scrubs. He came up against Cam Oliver, who they were playing toe-to-toe for a majority of both of their minutes. And then Xavier Cooks came in. And then Kelly LePepe, who is one of the biggest animals I've ever seen on a basketball court. So we saw it all, though, from Montrezl Harrell. We saw some strong dunks, some highlight plays. He even got a warning from the referees for engaging with the fans. If you actually go back and watch what he didn't even engage with the fans. He was yelling and pumping himself up. He was that excited to be back on a basketball court in front of a massive crowd in a really competitive game. He really kept them in that game for sure. He had some really good defensive plays, even that weren't on statistic end as well, but still had 2 blocks in this particular matchup. He is just Hollywood. That is what we wanted to see over in the NBL, because sometimes these guys will come over, and we probably have never seen a guy with the resume of Montrezl Harrell play in the NBL, to be honest with you. But some of these guys that come over who are very solid NBA players will come to the NBL and in a sense struggle because they try to make it all about them. Whereas over here, it's a more team sport. One guy in the NBA can win them a game. You see Luka Doncic carrying the Dallas Mavericks for such a long period of time. You see LeBron James doing the same thing. Looking back in the day, Derrick Rose carried the Chicago Bulls for such a long period of time there as well. One guy can carry a whole team. Now, to an extent in the NBL, one guy can, but you won't win many games of basketball. We saw it last season when Bryce Cotton had a bit of a down game and there was no one around him. The Perth Wildcats struggled because this is more of an international basketball feeling. You've got to have a really strong team and a really strong foundation to have success in the NBL. So I think he's really shown very early on that he is a must keep in terms of obviously bringing him back for the rest of the season, because we want to see a whole season of Montrezl Harrell. Could he be a guy who averages a double-double? I think yes. He could be a guy who averages, let's just say 15, 12, and 2 blocks a game, and a couple of assists to go in there as he starts to figure out how everyone plays. So I just think it's only going to get bigger and better from here. He's only going to get fitter. He's only going to get stronger. He's only going to figure out the rotations more. He's only going to figure out players' play styles more. It's going to be super, super exciting. And it really does make the Adelaide 36ers relevant, because they probably have been, for a lack of a better word, and I've said this multiple times, even on the Higgins' hot takes, on our pregame shows, all that sort of stuff, they have been the most dysfunctional franchise in NBL history. But you bring in Mike Wells, who looks like he's going to be very, very strong for this team and going to be a very strong leader. We've seen videos of him surfacing, screaming at the players and screaming at the organization in general. I love that. You've got to see that, because if the coach isn't invested and all in on everything that they're doing, then the players are just sat there going, oh, well, another season. Who cares? Who really cares? So you've got to really shift the culture of this franchise very quickly if they want to have success in the NBL, because this team last season, we saw when the culture was right and the rotations were right and everything else was in place, they had success in the NBL. They nearly made the NBL finals after their horrible start in NBL 24. So I think they're in for a massive season. I think if Montrezl Harrell stays around, I know Bogut put out a bit of a meme tweet yesterday, and I don't think he should really be talking in terms of, championship favourites and spending all their money, because the Sydney Kings must be the highest paid franchise in NBL history this season. They can't afford all those players, under a certain sort of salary cap, to be honest with you. But, at the end of the day, he said that the Adelaide 36ers should be NBL championship favourites. And, I think in all seriousness, if Montrezl Harrell sticks around, they get it all going, they've got a chance of really contending in the NBL. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there. But the number one take on Higgins' hot 3 takes has to be Hoopsfest. The NBL, I just want to sit here right now and congratulate you guys on such an amazing concept. I think you guys started the Magic round and Gather round in the AFL that we've seen over the last couple of seasons way back in COVID times in 2020 when you guys started the NBL Cup, because what that was essentially was an in-game an in-season sort of tournament based around obviously getting a couple of quick games together, all in one state, played over a couple of games and a couple of days. And it was really, really exciting. We saw basketball every single day. The NBA stole that idea very quickly. The NBL, I'd be trademarking the NBL Cup, or just an NBA Cup tournament in general, because you guys started that back in COVID times. We've seen the success in the NBA now. We've seen the success in the AFL. and now obviously this success in the NRL as well. And I hope this does stick around because it was great. Now, I don't know if I'm a little bit more biased because it was over here in Perth, but I think Perth was personally the perfect spot for it. I think Melbourne at this time of the year is a very saturated market with the AFL finals and the NRL finals on at the same time as well, with obviously, the AFL having a very sort of, big following in Melbourne itself. And then definitely, obviously, with the Melbourne Storm being as good as they have been over the last couple of seasons, the NRL sort of following is very strong in Melbourne as well. Then you look at Sydney, obviously the NRL finals are on, and the Sydney Swans have been an incredible team this season. So a lot of people have been flocking to the AFL and NRL. And then you look up at the Gold Coast, we saw at the NBL Blitz, it's not really a sporting sort of capital in a sense. Tasmania is too small for it. Yes, you could do it in Adelaide, but I'm not 100% certain if you'd sell out other games, barring the Adelaide 36ers games. So obviously Perth is really the only state left in terms of basketball, and they really showed out, I think. I think the NBL will be very happy with the numbers. I think everything was just perfect, though. Now, they obviously wanted to make it a family feel. Ticket prices were great. You can go and watch a basketball game for $20 to $40. It was. That is incredible. NBL, massive, massive round of applause to you guys, because it was honestly from top to bottom perfect. Basketball was great, obviously, but then you look at the experience around the basketball. The boombox down the other end of the court was incredible, with obviously Hayden James and Slumberjack, obviously the DJs. I know some people were complaining about the music, but they were trying to make a fun, involving family environment for young people to come and watch basketball. We've got to remember sometimes that basketball isn't about a 45-year-old to an extent. It's about bringing kids along and making it a real family environment, because when you can bring your kids to a basketball game, then you can come watch a basketball game, and then it makes everything so much easier. If you've got to leave your kids at home, or you've got to find somewhere to leave your kids, it's harder. Whereas if you've got an environment where it's very inviting for families, inviting for kids to come down, it only makes the overall NBL product even more exciting. But even looking outside of the basketball games, though, and outside of the boombox, and even just outside of RSC Arena, the whole experience was great. Kenny the Jet Smith and Carmelo Anthony doing interviews around Perth. You've obviously got the little basketball court set up there at Murray Street in Perth, with obviously NBL players rocking up there, doing some shoot-arounds, playing some games with fans, all that sort of stuff. The overall fan engagement of it was just tick, tick, tick for the Perth, I guess, capital city, and and obviously the Perth people as well, is what I'm trying to say there. But even just the NBL world as well, because the NBL world, I think, is on the brink of an explosion in Perth, and obviously in Australia as well, because it's obviously a massive league around the world, but a lot of people in Australia are still skeptical on it because of obviously the past of the NBL. And that's what's been very disappointing. But I think what they're doing right now is giving back to the fans for that long-term, I guess, engagement coming back their way as well. So I just think everything that was done was a tick. I just think the way they promoted not only the NBL, but the NBL Next Stars of obviously, like I said, Kenny the Jet Smith coming over and Carmelo Anthony coming over. Even guys like Nick Kyrgios floating around as well was pretty cool to see. Luke Longley, I think Andrew Bogut was in town for a bit. Even the new Perth Wildcats owner, Mark Arena, was loving his life. I think he had an incredible time as well. I just think everything, like I said, was just a massive tick for the NBL. I think they deserve a massive pat on the back. I know they've already been talk with the West Australian government as well in terms of bringing this back to Perth next season. And I think there's also been talk of a second NBL team as well. So let's keep an eye on that over the next couple of months, because they will be trying to figure out licensing and all that sort of stuff as well to see if it's logistically possible to have a second team in Perth. I think there's enough room for a second team. Now, it'd be very interesting for AFL fans. It was very interesting back in the day from what I've read and what I've heard. Obviously, when the West Coast Eagles started and the Freo Dockers started a couple of years later, a lot of people jumped ship, I guess, was the best way to describe it, from a successful team to a team that hadn't really had much success at all. So it'd be interesting to see how many people jump, because the Perth Wildcats, I guess, have been the face of the NBL for such a long period of time, and I guess the benchmark of the NBL for such a long period of time as well. So it's going to be very, very interesting. I wonder where you station the team. I wonder what you call the team. I'm very, very excited for it, but I think there's definitely enough room to have two teams, because if we can have two teams in Queensland, if we can have two teams in Sydney, I definitely think we can have two teams in Perth and even Adelaide as well, if we are looking at having another franchise added. But that is going to wrap up Higgins' hot three takes of the week. I just think the NBL needs a massive pat on the back in terms of what they've done over the last couple of seasons, in terms of marketing, in terms of just the overall product, in terms of the players that they've brought over here, the NBL Next Stars program. I don't think people give them enough credit and I guess enough sort of applause as well as a league, because they've done amazing things over the last couple of seasons. The star quality that we're seeing over in the NBL is as good as we've ever seen in the NBL. I didn't see it back in the late 90s and the early 2000s when this league was really, really pumping. But what I'm seeing right now from 10 years ago to now is just two different leagues. The two different leagues 100% of the way. And I'm super excited to see where they can go over the years. Now, like I've said, obviously coming up on the Basketball Fix, we've got our Beyond the Buzzer show, which is our weekly NBL talk show where we recap the week that was and give our reactions from the week before. And then obviously look ahead to a couple of the key games and matchups in the following round with a couple of fun little topics in there as well. We've obviously got our NBL Supercoach show that myself and Jez do on a weekly basis. So if you're a massive NBL Supercoach fan, make sure you check that out and look for those as well. And then obviously Ryan's got his Path to Pro series as well, which is really doing well. He's doing amazing. He's having fun talking about that as well. I know he's got some really, really good guests coming up, so make sure you stick around for that because he's got a lot in store for that little program, that little series. And then obviously I've got my one-on-ones with NBL players, media members, and coaches as well. They will be having a little bit of a break for now whilst the season sort of kicks off and all these players are figuring out, other things and traveling and all that sort of stuff as well. But once the season sort of settles in a little bit more, we'll have a few more people on, touch on a few topics and obviously hear their stories as well, which we're looking forward to doing. But that'll wrap up today's episode. Make sure you like, rate, and review the podcast. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and X at The Basketball Fix Podcast. And check our website out, www.thebasketballfix.com. But until next time, that's been your Basketball Fix.